We are interviewing with Professor Sarah Wald, who is one of 2 recipients of this year's University of Oregon Sustainability Awards for Excellence in Teaching. Sarah is a professor in both the Environmental Studies and English departments and is affiliated with the Food Studies program and also affiliated graduate faculty with the Indigenous, Race, and Ethnic Studies department. She researches and teaches classes on the relationship between race and the environment, immigration and citizenship, food studies, environmental justice, and nature and popular culture. Sarah was nominated for the Sustainability Award for Excellence in Teaching by a colleague who spoke in glowing terms of her pedagogy as, quote, a model of inclusive, engaged teaching and the kind of teaching UO is trying to promote. The selection committee was impressed with how thoughtfully Sarah scaffolds the purpose of assignments and larger courses for students earlier in their college learning, and how the inclusivity of her pedagogy is evident in both upper and lower division courses. The committee also recognizes Sarah's efforts with this year's Common Reading program, which includes her leadership in creating the teaching guide, mentorship of the graduate students who also worked on the guide, and how dynamically Sarah integrated the novel into her own courses. So I am very excited to get to talk to her about her work today. So Sarah, my first question is to talk to me about your upper division course that was mentioned in your nominating packet, the Diversity Initiatives on Public Lands course. What can you tell me about it?
Yes, that was a really exciting class to be able to teach. It was called Diversity Initiatives on Public Lands, and it was a 410-510 class. So there were both undergraduate students, mostly juniors and seniors, and graduate students in the class. And this was really related to one of my current research projects. We looked at the equity, diversity, and inclusion efforts of federal land agencies like the National Park Service and the U.S. Forest Service, alongside with the work of mainstream conservation organizations like the Sierra Club and the Wilderness Society, outdoor recreation companies like REI in Patagonia, and newer grassroots organizations like Outdoor Afro and Latino Outdoors. And the purpose of the class was really to prepare students when they leave UO and go out into the workforce to be able to engage in a thoughtful way with the equity, diversity, and inclusion efforts that they're going to encounter in the governmental organizations and the environmental organizations, the other kinds of work they're going to do, so that they'll do it in a thoughtful and informed way. And so the class was set up in a couple of different ways. It was a campus community connections course. So we had a community partner. We worked with the environmental organization BARC, which is a forest protection organization in Portland, Oregon. And all of the students were divided into groups that worked on a different aspect of equity, diversity, and inclusion work that BARC was engaging in. And BARC at that point was in an early stage of its work. And so, for example, one of the student groups looked over the mission statement for BARC, and they made a bunch of advice, suggestions about how the mission statement could do a better job of engaging with the lessons of the various kinds of EDI materials that they read from the course. Another group looked at questions of accessibility and thought about how accessibility could be better engaged in the organizations, from their monthly hikes to their in-office workshops. And they met with staff from BARC. The executive director came down and spent part of a class time meeting with them, and they presented their final materials to the class for feedback and then gave them over to the organization. And as part of this, they also produced posters for the undergraduate research symposium, and were able to present their research not only to the organization, but to a scholarly community to get feedback on the kind of intellectual work they were doing as well. And this involved research from everything from existing Forest Service guidelines and social science research to works of history and thinking about the history of the National Park Service, the history of the National Forest Service, the U.S. Forest Service, and also participating in a symposium we had on campus that year that was specifically looking at equity, diversity, and inclusion on public lands. And so the students attended the sessions of that and got to hear directly from practitioners in the field and from scholars thinking about these issues.
That sounds amazing. And it almost anticipates my next question, which is sort of how you are mentoring students for post-grad careers in or outside of academic engagements. And it sounds like this class is meaningfully doing both of those things.
I'm really excited about the ways in which environmental humanities scholarship, and especially the kinds of environmental humanities scholarship that prioritize environmental justice, can lead to work not only in the academy, but can actually make changes in our communities and contribute meaningfully to the justice work that's going on all around us. And so students definitely got skills in the class to think about the kinds of work they could do after the class with equity, diversity, inclusion. And as I mentioned, we had, not only did we have members from BARC come into the class, but we also had other folks who were doing this kind of work from organizations ranging from a state park in Colorado to someone who'd worked with Greenpeace on their Indigenous Peoples policy, to sort of think about what this really means in practice and the sort of messiness of practice, and what does it really mean to think about translating academic ideas to community work, and what does it also mean to learn from communities, to see communities as having their own kind of expertise that we in the academy can learn from. And again, the undergraduate research symposium was a wonderful opportunity in the class for students to get that dual focus and also really think about what does it mean to present work to a scholarly community? How do you take feedback, constructive feedback, and peer review into your own work to produce a final product whose audience is both an academic audience in terms of the posters and in terms of me, and a community audience in terms of the community organization that used their work.
Yeah, and that sounds fun. Like a great bridge between these, two different fields or ways of sharing knowledge, of creating knowledge, and of crafting knowledge. And that's, I feel like that's so important for faculty to be doing, for students to be doing, and for the public to be engaging with us as well. So it's great. So next I'm curious about your Intro to Environmental Studies in the Humanities course, which is a very large lower division lecture course. I mean, it's a few hundred students usually, right?
200 student class.
Yeah. Yeah, so kind of a similar question. Just tell me about that course a little bit.
I will tell you that is my favorite course to teach. I was really intimidated when I first started teaching it as a brand new UO faculty 6 years ago, because I'd never taught such a large course before, but it's really become a core part of the work I think I do here in helping undergraduate students understand why the humanities are so valuable to environmental studies, and also understanding the history of environmentalism and our ideas about nature and how they're far more diverse than we often think. So we inherit a particular kind of Western worldview of nature in the academy often that really can be complicated if we bring in different perspectives on how do we think about the more than human world, and also really grapple with what at times is a troubling history of environmentalism in the US. So the course really aims to help students understand how their own personal histories and experiences and identities shape their relationship to the more than human world, and how we can understand the history of environment and nature, largely in the US, but the class has some aspects where we look outside of the US, shape the way that we think about nature and how we can sort of start to think about environment and nature from multiple perspectives at once, and hold multiple subjectivities as valuable knowledge and experience for our environmental work.
Yeah, and I love that students are getting that, as first year students, sort of right out the gate, getting that foundational shift, right? It's foundation, but it's also a shift from traditional ways of thinking about it, and that's what college is for in a lot of ways.
Yeah, one of the things we start with the class is first day of class, the first thing we do is acknowledge that the University of Oregon is on Calapooya land. And we just start to think about all the landscapes that many of us have inhabited that are not originally US land, that they are occupied native land. And I think that is a really important critical shift for many of the students in the class.
Yeah, absolutely. So on that note, since this is for a teaching award in particular, how does your pedagogy shift between those smaller upper division classes and large lower division classes? Or maybe in what ways doesn't it shift?
Well, one of the things that's the same is I really believe in community engagement and service learning. I think we need to learn from communities. They have knowledge, and I think we need to decenter certain kinds of expertise and realize that people's lived experience brings a kind of knowledge that we don't always have. and that different students bring different sets of experiences to the class that help form different knowledge bases. But what community engagement looks like in a 200-person class is very different from a 20 or 30-person class. So one of the things we did in this class, in the big 200-person class, is we work with every year with Food for Lane County, and the students go out, each student is assigned a different Saturday, and they go out with their discussion section and spend 3 hours in one of the gardens for that Food for Lane County has, one of the community gardens. And that experience gives them a taste of community engagement and helps them think critically about some of the issues we're talking about in class, especially related to food and agriculture and farm labor. But it doesn't require the intensive one-on-one work that you have with a long-term community partner where you're building a particular project that the community partner is going to use.
Yeah, that makes sense. So similar base points, but modified to accommodate the size and level of the course.
And I think that the community engagement component is so important in a 200-person class because it's so easy to get lost in a class like that. And I think anything we can do to help build community in our large classes makes such a difference for students. And so having a field trip where you get out of the class with your classmates helps build the kind of trust that I want to see. I always tell students that a class should be intellectually uncomfortable and that we should be taking risks. And it's so much easier to take intellectual risks and have uncomfortable conversations if you like and know the people you're having those conversations with. And so I think community engagement serves a dual purpose of helping us serve and learn from communities while also helping us build communities as a classroom.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So the other thing that was mentioned in your nominating materials was your work with the UO's Common Reading Program. For those who don't know, every year UO selects a book that all first-year students receive, and the people who work on that committee encourage engagement with the book in courses and in programming, like talks and museum exhibits and things like that. And this past year's book was Under the Feet of Jesus by Helena Maria Viramontes, and you volunteered to lead the creation of the teaching guide for this book. So can you tell me a little bit about your work on that and what drew you to it?
Yes, so I've worked on Viramontes' novel, Under the Feet of Jesus, and actually her other novel as well, The Dog Skin With Them, for many, many years. I love these books. I teach Under the Feet of Jesus every year in Introduction to Environmental Humanities. And so I was thrilled to see that the book was named a common reading. And I really wanted the teaching guide to be interdisciplinary and to engage with all of the different kinds of expertise our graduate students have. So I taught a graduate level course on environmental justice, cultural studies, and one of the key projects for the class was creating the teaching guide. So the teaching guide was actually created by our brilliant, engaged graduate students in consultation with TEP. They broke up the guide, decided on the key topics, researched the background material, created the teaching activities. The guide went out to other faculty for peer review, and then the graduate students revised the guide using that peer review and getting to do that fun process of figuring out how do you make a change when two people recommend opposite changes. You can't do everything, you can't do both. And so it was really wonderful to get to see the graduate students engage intellectually with the material, but also really stretch their pedagogical wings and coming up with different kinds of assignments that would work, whether you were in a philosophy class or whether you were in a psychology class.
Yeah, and that both mirrors the intellect or the cross-disciplinary goals of environmental studies as a program in particular. And I know I certainly appreciated my graduate experience, the focus on teaching in at least the humanities wing of the University of Oregon grad program. So that's really cool to hear about a version of that that goes even a step deeper.
One of the things that was really cool about the class is that the graduate students in it were in several different departments, and the class counted towards the politics, culture, and identity program. And so it ran as an English graduate class, but there were graduate students as well from environmental studies and political science, and people had different disciplinary stakes they were bringing to the table, which was really exciting.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I just have one more question, and it's why do you think it's important to teach these sustainability topics at a research university? And I'm thinking here of sort of that three-legged stool of sustainability that include environment, equity, and economy. So feel free to talk about whichever pieces resonate most with you and with your teaching work.
Yes, well, I'm going to talk about two different parts. First is I think the environmental humanities are central to engaging with the environmental problems that we face in the 21st century. The environmental humanities let us think about the different ways in which we have imagined or engaged with the environment and our nature in the past, and help us envision new and more just ways of doing that in the future. And so I think it's just as a crucial piece of the puzzle for environmental studies, and one that is often left out in a lot of policy decisions. And so setting up a course like 203 Intro to Environmental Humanities and letting all the students who might come in skeptical of the humanities see its value and worth, I think is really important for the kinds of research and leadership that students from University of Oregon go on to play, especially in the state of Oregon. And the second thing that I think is so vital about this work for both teaching and research is centering environmental justice. We have a history of environmentalism in the US that has ignored the ways that power and privilege operate, that has been exclusionary, sometimes explicitly, oftentimes more recently implicitly, and helping students think about how we put justice and power and privilege at the center of our environmental discussions helps us think about how do we foster and sustain a really inclusive and justice-oriented environmentalism for the 21st century, especially in this context of climate change that we're all facing.
Yeah, and that's another area where that need for imagining and creating and thinking about what could be different also comes into play.
Yes, and students, they have so much to offer. They come from so many different places with so many different experiences that the kind of work they do in classes, whether it's my big 200-person classes or my smaller upper division seminars, really, they create worlds and projects and solutions that I learn so much from. And it's really important for us as faculty to be able to have our research always engaged with the really exciting new perspectives that our students, whether they're undergraduates or graduates, bring into the classroom.
Yeah, great. Well, Sarah, it has been a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you so much, and congratulations again on your award.
Thank you.